Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
The mind of the minister, restoring trust between ministers and civil servants. Britain's most important relationship between civil servants and ministers has reached a breaking point. Tom Brown has written a compelling new book about the mind of the minister. Delighted to say that Tom joins us live from somewhere in the annals of Westminster, no doubt. Tom, good morning to you.
Hi, Giles. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I am in the UK and amongst ministers and civil servants. That's right. What's
your background, by the way, for people who don't know? I mean, obviously, I'm Giles Brown. You're Tom Brown. It's Jocelyn Brown's birthday today, but we're not all related. So, what is your background for this particular insight into the mind?
I would have said I'm looking forward to seeing it at Christmas, but no, we're not all related. So I've been working with civil servants, ministers for nearly 15 years, both in the UK and around the world. So I worked a lot with other governments as well. And I suppose that I've sort of been in the intersection of politicians and officials for a long time, both working with them and alongside them and also sort of observing. And for the book, I interviewed 6 former ministers and 7 former permanent secretaries to really explore what has become a problem really for the UK, and I think it's one that's been relegated with other news, which has been more, I suppose, seen as more important. But trust is broken really between ministers and civil servants, and I suppose your listeners might be asking, why does that matter? And I suppose the relationship matters for 3 critical reasons. The first is that it's the basis on which all government activity rests. So all public services and direction for the country completely rests on this relationship working well. The second is that if that is healthy, if that relationship is healthy, then the government that people voted for can deliver the promises that people voted for. But if it's unhealthy, then the delivery of policy and therefore those promises is curtailed. And then the third thing is that the health of that relationship, it has a direct impact on people's trust in institutions. Because if the government can't deliver what it said it's going to do, if it can't deliver the services that people expect from it, then we've got a real problem. And there's a damage to the trust that the public would have in institutions and what the government's capable of doing. So if that relationship is working well, then actually it's enormously better for citizens and the population.
But you can argue that we should have seen this coming because of the way that these two, you use the word institution, and there is perhaps no greater, I'll get the yes minister elephant out of the room at the minute, but there is no greater institution than the civil service, personified, typified. And if you look at that particular brilliant comedy, I mean, people think that is how the civil service still operates. And to a certain extent, you can kind of see that because civil servants are in for life. And yet the nature of our politicians and the reason that people are going into politics or perhaps staying in politics has fundamentally changed over the past 15 to 20 years.
Well, I think there's 3 big differences between civil servants and politicians, right? So you're absolutely right that politicians are short-term thinkers and civil servants are long-term thinkers. So politicians, and when they become ministers, they don't know how long they're going to be in post. They could be in for 2 years, and 2 years is probably a good stint, but could be in for a matter of weeks, and we've seen that happen. Whereas civil servants, they're called the permanent civil service, so they're in for the long term. The second big difference is that politicians are partisan, right? So they are from a party. They have a really particular and specific way that they view the world. And it's not only their own view that matters, it's their party's view that matters. And so there's a complex politics that they're navigating there. Whereas civil servants, they're impartial. So they're just trying to provide evidence. They're trying to serve the government of the day. They're trying to make things happen for that government. But that's a big difference between them. And I suppose the third thing is that all politicians want to simplify things. They want to see things and communicate things simply. Whereas civil servants are all about complexity, and they like the layers. They like to be able to present all the different options that are there, and they're thinking about all the things that can go wrong all the time, not just the things that you can shout about and celebrate. And I think those 3 differences are sort of very significant. But we should have seen it coming in a way. You're right. In 2020, I think I sort of see that as the nadir really of the relationship. We had 6 permanent secretaries forced out in 2020, and that's never happened before in our history. You mentioned yes minister. I think that there was this sort of cynical view of the civil service that was playing out in some areas of the press and also by the government of the time, which is that civil servants were trying to manipulate ministers. And the truth is that the civil servants, they're not trying to undermine the minister, they're trying to understand the mind of the minister. And that's the sort of crux of this. And Yes Minister is sort of plays out in public consciousness as a description of the way that civil servants and ministers work together. I think I've got sort of two comments on that, really. One is that the reality is that, funnily enough, it's quite backwards looking, Yes Minister. So the moment at which it's released is actually the moment it's ceased to be like that because of Margaret Thatcher's reforms. She created all sorts of efficiencies and changes that empowered ministers more and sort of gave civil servants increasingly the role that they have today. And so in practice, it's not really like that very much. But on the other side of that coin, every minister that I know and have talked to, and there's many, they all have a Yes Minister moment. And they all have a moment where something's happened and they within the story, they say, and it was just like Yes Minister. And there's somebody who was the Secretary of State I talked to a few months ago. They're not anymore. And this is a good example. They said, I was trying to move office on the same floor that I was on. I just needed to be closer to some of the other activities that I was doing. It's a vacant office. I requested to move office. Took 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, they had 4 options back. The first one was we can change the carpet. Second one is we can put blinds to the curtains. Third one was we can change the composition of your office and swap you with someone else in a different office, but it wasn't the office they wanted. And the fourth one was we'll move your office. And for a minister, it seems like a simple request. Can I move into a vacant office on the same floor? And to you and I, and probably all your listeners, Giles, you'd be thinking, why on earth wouldn't you just do it? And that feels like a Yes Minister moment for the minister. And it's in kind of their consciousness. They're almost looking for it. There's a bias, which I think is probably confirmed. And frankly, that is quite a Yes Minister moment. But civil servants also have reasons for doing things in a particular way. And providing options is ultimately almost like sort of the verifier to say that is actually the best thing to do. And they have to provide 4 different options. And the first 3 sound silly, and frankly, they are silly and they should have just moved office. But it's kind of part of the process to make sure that ministers know that they're getting all the options available all the time and that anything that they're deciding to do is evidence-based. So the whole thing's a bit more complex, but the book is absolutely full of stories. And I think one of the things that I would love as a result of the book is to sort of rehumanize the conversation about people that work in these roles. And we've seen a real dehumanization of civil servants. But we've also seen a dehumanization of politicians. And, some people might say they haven't helped themselves. Maybe, but they're also people. And I think the sort of severity of the risk that some politicians are at the moment, that has changed in the last 10 years, 8 years. We've had 2 MPs that have been murdered. That's not something that was as commonplace as you would say in the last 8 years at any point in our sort of previous 100 years of history. And so politicians are in a more dangerous position than they were. And actually the atmosphere is more febrile. And we do need to rehumanize people that are real people doing very important roles that ultimately we need to do the roles well. Because they impact all of us. But
the thing is that last point is the fact that we do, the UK does politics like nowhere else with surgeries. And that is the direct link that you have between the politician and the people. And if you take that away, then we're back into that sort of, we can basically sort of kiss goodbye to what has made the UK politics special. I like the thing about providing options because if you think about it, 1 minute you're the Minister for Housing and the next minute you're the Minister for Defence, and you've got to go on that afternoon and sound as if you have slipped into or gone into this like shining from shook full just very smoothly. So you need to have those options, and you need to be able to have a staff that kind of has got your back, Tom.
100%. You're totally right, Giles. And I think that one of the things which is criticised, and I interviewed Rory Stewart for this book, and in his own book, he makes this point, and lots of others have. Why are politicians not more kind of equipped to be policy specialists in the area they're taking? Why do we not consistently have a Secretary of State for Health who's worked in the NHS or been a doctor? Why is the local government minister not got a council background? what rural affairs, etc. And I think one of the answers is politics. Politics always comes to the fore in the end. And, I think this current government, the current Labour government, is quickly sort of finding its feet on politics and discovering that, a strong position can quickly be eroded when politics comes into play. And I suspect that it's only going to get more difficult, to be honest, with hundreds of very ambitious backbench MPs who want to join government and become ministers at some point. That always comes to the fore. And so we do, I think that's something we just have to accept, that in the system that we have, we're always going to get people who don't necessarily know everything about the job going into the job. And so that briefing and getting on top of things really quickly is really important. And that's one of the benefits of having a consistent and permanent civil service, which you have in the UK, where there's a lot of institutional memory, there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of kind of deep-seated expertise. And it's something that where, if you think about the comparison with the US, and you've got an incoming president now that, his team have to appoint 4,000 public officials, ideally in the next few weeks. I think it's unlikely. 1,200 of those have to be approved by the Senate. That it's a laborious process, and you lose so much expertise, and ultimately, I think we're already kind of seeing in the US that loyalty trumps specialism, and so wasn't meant to be. That wasn't meant to be a pun, but that ultimately you get lots of political appointees in that, and there's people that have to then sort of, who are the officials who are supposed to be the ones that know what they're talking about. They're the ones who then have to sort of get up to speed. Whereas in our system in the UK, it's the minister that has to get up to speed, and they are surrounded by people that are subject matter specialists. And those subject matter specialists, the civil servants, they've got to adjust to what the minister wants to do. And they're very professional at doing that.
Two words for you. Grant Shapps. I had the pleasure of interviewing him when he came over to Spain, and he was overseas development minister. Seems like a lifetime ago, but that man was like a pinball through the ministerial portfolio, wasn't he? I mean, that just goes to show that you have to have that continuity has to keep going.
That's right. And Grant Shapps is excellent at politics. People will have different opinions about how good Grant Shapps is at different things, but you cannot deny the guy's good at politics. And actually, that's one of the key skills that you need in the mix. And I think if you have everyone who's only good at politics, it's quite difficult to get things done. You do need some people who are also focused on the policy as well. But you need a balance in your cabinet, and that's where a good prime minister earns their keep, as it were.
How difficult is it at the moment, though? Because you have certain politicians or certain people in opposition, whatever, saying, "Oh, but we are run by and here we go, run by the deep state. There are institutions that need to be torn down, etc., etc., etc." If you go in, and I'm just thinking of the past government with some very interesting appointments who had a very interesting agenda, that's going to make your ministerial sort of relationship very, very difficult. I mean, do you think that because you have to, the politics is about the art of compromise in a good way? You could argue, Tom. So do you think that we still, if you're good at politics like Grant, you can, as Groucho Marx said, I have principles, and if you don't like them, I've got some more or whatever. But do you think that is the art of politics, and perhaps maybe some of the politicians are losing that in the maelstrom of social media and the tweet and the statement, whereas the ministers are that counterbalance, the civil servants, and we do need that?
Yes. Well, I think everything runs in cycles, right? So we are at the beginning of a political cycle at the moment. There's a lot of political capital that the current government has. That will be worn away at some point. And we've just come off the back of a long political cycle, and we've also come off the back of two major crises. Brexit is a form of crisis. Whatever your opinion is of Brexit, okay, it didn't go very smoothly, and we weren't prepared for it. And all we have to look at is the activity that happened afterwards. It was crisis style activity, constantly trying to find a way through and solve something. And that was immediately followed by COVID. So 2016 to 2020 is Brexit, 2020 onwards is COVID. That's a long time to be in crisis, and it's a long time to try and to sort of figure stuff out. And then if you've got all of that, and then you get to the end of a political cycle, I suppose in some respects, it's not a surprise that the relationship between ministers and civil servants really deteriorated. And I think that was absolutely not helped by Boris Johnson's I think sort of generally disregard for the ministerial code, which is supposed to be the sort of set of rules that governs how ministers behave. He wasn't particularly interested in that. He certainly wasn't interested in applying it. And perhaps the weakness of the ministerial code is the entire thing relies on the Prime Minister to employ it. And if they decide not to, then ultimately there's not much that's keeping ministers in check, is the truth. So I think, in a way, it's not surprising that some of the relationship was disintegrating. Given all of those things in the mix, it's a pretty awful cocktail for sort of working relationships. But it's trust that needs to be built. And I suppose sort of some of my conclusions are that both ministers and civil servants actually need just to take a minute. They need to step back and try and find the other one. They need to find the space in the middle, try and understand each other better, and build trust. And I've got a sort of a set of 5 things. It's authenticity, logic, empathy, respect, and competence. And a combination of those things, I think, can really build trust. And you can't take it for granted. And it's like, as far as, from my perspective, it's not easy, but it is embarrassingly achievable to improve this relationship.
How willing were people on both sides to talk to you about this, Tom? Because, Rory Stewart, I can obviously see, because he's got and it's interesting because Stewart was an army officer, as is Mercer, who also left, and they know all about team building. But how willing are people to frankly, talk to you about this on both sides, especially the civil servants?
Well, Giles, I was surprised, if I'm honest. And I think I hadn't realised how many other people also thought this was a massive issue. So I spoke to quite a lot of the permanent secretaries which were ousted in 2020. So Simon MacDonald, he ultimately sort of flicked the domino, which caused Boris Johnson's downfall, but also played a major part in Dominic Raab's investigation as well, which was independently investigated his behaviour and the claims of bullying. Philip Rutnam is the one who resigned because of Priti Patel's behaviour very publicly. So I interviewed both of them. And Jonathan Slater, another one who, I don't know if you remember, your listeners might, the exams fiasco of 2020 in the UK anyway, during COVID, Gavin Williamson was the education minister then. He should have fallen on his sword. He did not.
Sir Gavin Williamson, is he now?
Sir.
Yes.
My apologies, sir. And absolutely, Sir Gavin Williamson. Also good at politics, Sir Gavin. Claire Moriarty and Una O'Brien and Sue Owen, extremely experienced former permanent secretaries, all really open, actually. And Philip Rycroft as well. So 2 of them were at Department for Exiting the EU. Really open, and I was very grateful to them for being sharing so much. On the minister's side, actually, I found also extremely open. So not all of them sort of have done that many interviews, but Andrew Lansley had been a civil servant and a minister, which was one of the reasons I wanted to talk to him. Robert Halfon actually ended up doing the same role twice. Hardly anyone gets to have a second bite of the cherry. Really, he's a lovely guy, Robert, and I think quite inspiring stories, really, that he shared with me. Caroline Flint, you may remember from back in the day. She's doing a bit more media these days. And Caroline also helped to put the smoking ban in place. And that's probably the flag that she can wave the hardest there. And Vince Cable, and also David Gork, who are close, was a minister for 9 years, actually, David Gork. And that's also pretty rare. So quite a spectrum of experiences, really. And everyone was really open, Giles. And I was both surprised and grateful to them for, I suppose, kind of being a bit vulnerable and also just sharing their own experiences of what went right, what went wrong, and how things can get better.
What are you hoping that people will take and people will learn from the book, The Mind of the Minister?
I think it's good, actually, for us to step back and remember difficult times. I think, I might include myself in this, to be honest. You kind of want to wipe COVID from your memory. It wasn't exactly sort of great times, was it? But I think it is actually, it's helpful, to give yourself time, not to do too much at once, but actually just to reflect on some of the difficult moments there. This type of history is the sort of thing that gets lost in amongst a sort of a traumatic experience. But it's a really important moment in British political history, but also political operation. And it's really important that we look at it, that we recognise that it was really bad in 2020, that we recognised the sort of trajectory was wrong, and they were testing times. And I think the things that I wanted sort of people to take away ultimately is, like I said, rehumanising the conversation around real people that are working in real roles. Ideally, there's a sort of quite a targeted audience for this, which is civil servants and ministers themselves, both current and future, to try and think about their approach a bit more and how to work better together and how to basically achieve more. Something I found, Giles, when I was looking at this in depth, is that ministers that had better relationships with civil servants ultimately achieved a lot more. And the ones who did not have good relationships do not have many achievements to talk about. And that's, if you're a minister, you should be thinking about that, because you should be thinking about your legacy and what you want to achieve. What's the point of being there in the first place? If you can work well with civil servants, then you're likely to achieve a great deal more.
The book is called The Mind of the Minister. It's by Tom Brown, who is speaking today. Tom, you can order it, by the way, via our own virtual bookstore. Tom, if people want to find you online and say nice things to you, where's the best place to go?
I'm at Tom John Brown. I am on X. I just joined Blue Sky as well. Seems like with millions of others in the last few days.
Yes.
And I'm on LinkedIn as well. And TikTok. Not dancing, but I am doing some videos.
We wait those with bated breath. The book is called The Mind of the Minister, Restoring Trust Between Ministers and Civil Servants. It's by Tom Brown. Tom, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Giles.